finally, Jack Nicholson. He turned 89 this week. Nicholson, a three-time Oscar winner, doesn't make many public appearances these days.
And man, he might be the best of all time.
Yeah.
Every room he entered, every scene he claimed, every debate over the greatest living actor, he dominated them all. Then, post-2010, he simply vanished. No final film, no retirement speech, no goodbye. For 15 years, the man who brought the Joker, Jack Torrance, and Randall McMurphy to life has been hidden behind the tall gates of his Mulholland Drive home, leaving the public to guess why. Then, in February of 2025, he made a final appearance, and the images spoke volumes. The boy raised on a lie. To understand why Jack Nicholson withdrew, you have to look at his foundations. The first thing that defined him was a secret so deep it took nearly 40 years to surface. He was born April 22nd, 1937, in New York City. Though his family hailed from Neptune, New Jersey, his teenage mother, June Nicholson, traveled to New York to deliver him quietly, far from the small-town rumors. She was unmarried. His father already had another wife. A scandal like that, back then, could have ruined a family reputation. So, June's mother, Ethel May, stepped in and made a choice that shaped Jack's entire youth. She registered as his mother. June was introduced as his older sister. The boy grew up believing his grandmother was his parent and his mother was his sibling. Nobody corrected him. And in 1954, when he required official documents to visit California, Ethel May filed a birth record that cemented the deception. The household remained modest and fractured. The man Jack thought was his father, John Joseph Nicholson, was actually his grandfather. He worked as a department store window trimmer. Ethel May cut hair for a living. Neither of them had been raised by their biological parents either. The entire home was built on displacement and silence, and Jack internalized that climate long before he could process it. He learned the truth only in 1974, when he was already 37 and famous. A reporter from Time magazine called him while drafting a cover story and revealed that his supposed mother was actually his grandmother, and the woman he thought was his sister was his true mother. By the time Jack discovered this, both women had passed away. June died of cancer in 1963. Ethel May died in 1970. The only people who could have clarified the lie were gone long before it was exposed. Nicholson handled it with a composure that felt more unsettling than a total breakdown. He called it a dramatic revelation, but not traumatizing, since he was already psychologically set. Still, the damage remained. He never wed. He had children with different women, but kept his romantic life intentionally chaotic. The boy raised inside a secret grew into a man who kept the world at a safe, controlled distance, and that distance eventually would swallow him whole. But first, he had to become the biggest movie star on earth, the rise that nearly failed. Jack Nicholson spent the better part of a decade struggling in Hollywood before anyone truly noticed him. His first industry job was not acting. It was running errands at the animation studio where the creators of Tommy and Jerry worked. He hauled mail, grabbed coffee, and studied the machinery of entertainment from the sidelines. When the studio offered him a real animator role, he declined because it meant a pay cut. The cartoon division closed soon after, and Nicholson turned toward acting. He trained at the Players Ring Theater with Jeff Corey, a veteran actor who had been blacklisted during the McCarthy era and reinvented himself as a teacher. Corey's class was filled with future Hollywood stars, and his philosophy stayed with Nicholson forever. He taught that great acting was not about faking emotion, but about absorbing life until the emotion became authentic. By the mid-1960s, Nicholson had done about 15 films with almost no name recognition. He began writing screenplays out of necessity because no one was offering him parts recognition. He began writing scripts purely out of need since nobody else was calling, snagging top billing. Even his big break as George Hansen in Easy Rider only came his way because another actor walked out after a heated blow-up with director Dennis Hopper. Easy Rider hit the culture like an earthquake in '69, and Nicholson rode that shockwave. His first Oscar nod followed soon after. Then came a streak of roles that has almost no match in American film. Five Easy Pieces in '70, Chinatown in '74, plus One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in '75. That one won him his first Oscar and swept all 5 major Academy Awards. Then came The Shining in '80 and Terms of Endearment in '83, which scored him his second win. Batman hit in '89, where he negotiated a back-end deal that reportedly pocketed him between $60 and $90 million. Then came A Few Good Men in '92, followed by As Good as It Gets in '97, which landed his third statue. By the new millennium, Jack Nicholson was no longer just a star. He was a monument. And then, quietly, the monument began to step back. But before he vanished, there was one final chapter most documentaries miss. It explains his withdrawal better than anything else. The relationships that finally wore him out. Other channels covering Nicholson's exit focus purely on his health. But there is another thread, running through his later years, that demands a look. It connects directly to why a man who once thrived on the spotlight decided he was done with it. Jack Nicholson's romantic life was epic in scale and often brutal in its rhythm. He spent 17 years with Angelica Houston, one of the longest and most famous pairings in Hollywood history. He finished it in the coldest possible fashion, over dinner. He broke the news that another woman was expecting his child. Houston, who had faced her own struggles with fertility, saw the writing on the wall. She told him there was room for one woman in that life, and she was stepping out. 17 years gone in one conversation. That other woman, Rebecca Broussard, bore him 2 kids, Lorraine in '90 and Ray in '92. But even that bond eventually splintered. Nicholson later dated Lara Flynn. Boyle in the early 2000s. By the time that ended, he was pushing 70, and by most accounts, exhausted. In a rare 2013 Vanity Fair sit-down, one of his final deep dives with the press, he dropped a line that landed heavier than anything else in the piece. He was no longer hungry to be out there. He said the only movies he cared about were those rooted in real emotion, that could actually move an audience. He admitted he lacked the stamina to work and also keep playing the field. During his last few projects, he barely left his hotel. For a man whose private life was just as legendary as his work, that confession showed a total shift. The engine that had fueled his public life, that thirst for raw experience and risk, had finally died down. Once that motor cut out, there was no point in pretending. His final film, How Do You Know, was released in December of 2010. It was a rom-com. It flopped by roughly $70 million. And Jack Nicholson, without ever making a formal statement, simply stopped acting. So, what has really been going on behind those walls on Mulholland Drive for the last 15 years? Just the man behind the gates. Rumors caught fire almost immediately after he disappeared from public view. In 2013, Radar Online claimed that he had stepped back because of a memory loss, insisting he could no longer memorize lines to work. Those close to him fired back. One source told Maria Shriver he wasn't battling dementia or any cognitive illness and was still reading scripts and eyeing new roles. Yet the years dragged on and nothing ever got made. In 2017, he was briefly linked to star in an American remake of the German hit Tony Erdmann. For a second, it looked like a real comeback was on the table. Then he backed out and the whole thing fell apart. Director James L. Brooks later mentioned that Nicholson was still reading scripts constantly, a detail that feels strangely haunting because it suggests the door was never locked in his mind. It just never swung open in reality. Reports from 2021 and 2022 described Nicholson spending nearly all his days inside his Mulholland Drive estate. The property. Neighbors described a man who stayed inside, physically steady, but living in a world that had shrunk. His kids, Lorraine and Ray, became his steady anchor and his main companions. Ray Nicholson, who has carved out his own acting career and starred in the horror. Film Smile 2, back in 2024, talks about his father with total clarity. He told Deadline that they were very different people. He was born in 1992, his father in 1937, and that each man's path was his own. But he added that he ate dinner with his father every night growing up, and that watching him closely was how he learned what it meant to be a person. In May of 2025, a source gave the New York Post perhaps the most honest look at Nicholson that anyone close to him has ever dared to share. The insider said Jack does not like to be seen out in public anymore, that he had been spotted at a hotel and looked a bit shaky on his feet. The source noted that part of his old magic was that wild, extravagant lifestyle, and eventually all of that catches up with you. Then, the source dropped a detail that explains his disappearance better than any doctor ever could. The source said Jack and his inner circle want people to remember him exactly as he once was. That is not a man in crisis. That is a man making a very deliberate choice. Jack Nicholson is not hiding because he is broken. He is choosing to let the version of himself that the world fell in love with remain the version that sticks. The monster from The Shining, the Joker from Batman, the rebel from Cuckoo's Nest. Those are the faces he wants people to remember. Not an 88-year-old man using a cane, but even a man that committed to vanishing could not resist one final curtain call. And when he did, it told the world everything. The night Jack came back, on February 16th, 2025, NBC aired the SNL 50th anniversary special celebrating 5 decades of Saturday Night Live. The crowd at Studio 8H in New York was packed with the biggest names in Hollywood. And then, from his seat in the audience, wearing a dark jacket, dark glasses, and a beret with a New York Yankees logo, 87-year-old Jack Nicholson leaned forward and spoke. He said 5 words: "Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Sandler." The room went wild. Sandler, his co-star from the 2003 film Anger Management, pointed to the crowd and shouted back. He told the room to give it up for Jack. That Jack had made it out tonight, and that he loved him. Then Sandler grabbed a guitar and played a tribute to 50 years of the show for Nicholson, who had not been seen in public since a Lakers game in May of 2023. The cameo was a huge shock. His daughter, Lorraine, sat beside him. Photographers caught him the next day leaving the Carlyle Hotel in New York, moving with a cane. Fans said he still looked sharp for his age. Others noticed the frailty. He was 87 years old, and the gap between the man in the beret and the man who had terrorized Shelley Duvall through the halls of the Overlook Hotel was 45 years wide. But here is what really mattered about that moment. Nicholson had never actually hosted Saturday Night Live in his entire legendary career. He appeared at the 40th anniversary special in 2015, and later mentioned he regretted never taking a turn as host. So, when he showed up for the 50th, seated in the crowd instead of on the stage, it carried a weight that went way beyond celebrity. This was a man acknowledging the end of an era, not with a speech or a formal press release. With 5 words and applause from a room of people who truly understood what they were witnessing, it was not a comeback. It was a goodbye disguised as a cameo. A man who had spent 15 years behind closed doors chose one night, one room, 5 words, and then went home. And then, 8 months later, the world he had walked away from dealt him one more crushing blow. The loss that changed everything. On October 11th, 2025, Diane Keaton died. She was 79. The cause was pneumonia. Keaton had been one of Nicholson's closest friends and creative partners for years. They had starred together in Something's Gotta Give in 2003, and their connection ran far deeper than just one movie. She was one of the very few people who still had full access to the man behind the gates. According to reports, those close to Nicholson were deeply worried about how the loss would hit him, both emotionally and physically. Living a reclusive, contracted life, losing one of his few final tethers to the world he once ruled was a heavy blow. But in July of 2025, months before Keaton passed, Danny DeVito, a friend for over 50 years, offered the most comforting update in a long time. DeVito told People magazine that he had caught up with Jack just weeks prior, around his birthday, and that he was doing great. Recalling their decades of friendship, DeVito said there was no need for small talk from the very start. They simply understood each other. That bond, dating back to the early 70s, remains one of the few threads keeping Nicholson linked to the world. DeVito checks in. Family is close. The Mulholland Drive estate remains, yet the industry has moved on without him. And the man who once commanded the biggest deals in Hollywood history now lives within, a quiet version of the silence he grew up absorbing without even realizing it. Still, the old Jack occasionally resurfaces. In January of 2025, when devastating wildfires tore through Pacific Palisades and surrounding Los Angeles, Nicholson reportedly offered his Mulholland Drive home to his former partner, Angelica Houston, the very woman whose heart he broke over. Dinner decades ago, she had lost her own place in the blaze. The gesture stayed quiet, private, and never became a public tabloid story. But it proved that the man behind those iron gates was still paying attention, still deeply connected to those who mattered, still capable of grace despite his self-imposed isolation. Why he truly vanished, there is no simple reason for why Jack Nicholson disappeared. The truth, as it is with complex souls, involves a collision of events that gathered strength until the sheer momentum of pulling away became its own gravity. His body slowed down. The fire that once fueled the wildest life in Hollywood cooled. As he admitted back in 2013, his desire for the work shifted. He continued reading scripts, but nothing grabbed him enough to face the grueling cost of making a movie. The industry changed too, shifting into a realm of franchises and digital effects that had little room for the raw, dangerous, and improvisational fire he built his legend upon. And the connections that once kept him anchored to public life faded, leaving only family and a small circle of old friends. Ultimately, the deepest explanation might be the one his inner circle shared with the press. They wanted fans to remember him exactly as he was. That represents a profound bit of self-awareness from a man whose career was defined by his presence. He understood, better than any, that his image was everything, and he chose to shield it by stepping away before the public could watch the spark fade. Jack Nicholson did not lose Hollywood. He simply let it go. And by doing that, he achieved something that almost no star of his status has ever managed. He walked away on his own terms, without a press release, without a ceremony, without giving the audience the satisfaction of a final bow. He simply stopped and let the silence take over. The legend who gave us the axe through the door, the courtside sunglasses, the grin that could either terrify or charm, decided that his greatest final act was no performance at all. Just a locked gate on a hill above Los Angeles and a legacy that needs no further addition. Jack Nicholson gifted the world 4 decades of performances that will never be duplicated, and in the end, he gifted us something even rarer. A silence that speaks louder than most actors ever manage in their entire careers. If you enjoyed this dive, stay tuned for more. Be sure to explore our other deep dives. Just a locked gate on a hill above Los Angeles and a legacy that needs no further addition. Jack Nicholson gifted the world 4 decades of performances that will never be duplicated, and in the end, he gifted us something even rarer. A silence that speaks louder than most actors ever manage in their entire careers. If you enjoyed this dive, stay tuned for more. Be sure to explore our other deep dives.